The brand new Warframe Koumei just released and she is incredibly strong, even on very low investment and pure chaos on screen. So, in this build guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about her, where to farm her, her abilities, and of course, also how to mod her. But first, one very important thing in real life. Digital Extremes, the developers of Warframe, this October are fundraising for the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation in their quest to conquer cancer. So, in case you have a couple bucks to spare, this is a great cause to put them to. Link in the description, and with that being said, let's jump right into it. So, first things first, the most important question at the beginning of the video, where do we even get Koumei from? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward and new player friendly at the same time. All you need to do is to go to Cities on Earth, talk to Konzu, and after that you can interact with the Koumei Shrine to begin a mission called Shrine Defense, where you're defending 2 points against Infested, and there will be a boss type enemy that spawns, and that's it. You can either get Koumei from the mission directly, or if you're unlucky, you can purchase her blueprint and her components as well as her weapon stuff from a new resource called Fate Pearl. This resource is dropped by this boss type enemy from the mission. All in all, very straightforward, and enemy levels are so low that even for very new players, Koumei should be no problem to farm. I personally received Koumei day 1 as part of the Warframe Creator Program, so big thank you to Digital Extremes for giving that to me, and with that being said, let's take a look at what Koumei can actually do. First off, her passive is really darn cool. What this does is, every 60 seconds, one of your weapons will start dealing random status effects. This symbol right here shows which type of weapon, primary, secondary, or melee, currently has this effect on, and then it switches from weapon type to weapon type every 60 seconds. Another thing that Koumei has that no other Warframe has are these 5 dice right here. Every time Koumei casts an ability, those 5 dice are going to be rolled, and if 3 or more of them happen to be a 6, then the ability that you casted will get a special boost, about which we're also going to talk as we're going into the abilities right now. Just one thing in case you're curious, the chance of having 3 or more 6s with a dice roll like this is unfortunately only a measly 3.5%, so you better don't bet on this. Koumei's first ability is called Kumihimo. What this does is it creates a bunch of lines, a bunch of threads in an area around you, and whenever an enemy touches one of these, they will deal a little bit of damage and inflict a random status effect onto this enemy. Now, if you ask me, the damage that this does is pretty negligible, especially in higher levels, but on the base level star chart it might be worth going for it. And this is the very cool part, if you roll this with a triple 6, then when an enemy touches one of these threads, they're not going to get one random status effect, they're going to get one of every status effect in the game. Or at least that's what the ability itself says. In reality, what all status effects in the game means is what you see on this screenshot right here. All 4 base elements, heat, toxin, electricity, and cold, as well as all 6 combined elements, but no void, not the new Tau, and also nothing else. Ability number 2 is called Omikuji, and this is, I think, by far one of the strongest abilities in the entire game out of all the Warframes, and it is just pure chaos. It is crazy. Let's talk about it. What this ability does is, when you cast it, it gives you a little task that you can do in the mission. Most of the time it's going to be take out X amount of enemies in a certain type of way. Pretty easy stuff. And when you fulfill this task, you will get one random decree from the V-Ray. Now, at this point in time, I'm not sure if every single decree from the V-Ray is included or if there are exceptions. I've done a couple test runs, received a ton of decrees, but nothing special that I could tell from just this alone. And at the point of recording this, there is no wiki entry on this yet. So if we have new information in the days to come, I will keep you updated in the pinned comment. However, the most important question here would be, do those decrees stack? And indeed, it seems like you can stack as many of these decrees as you want in the mission and they last forever. That's also what the devs said in their recent dev stream recap. However, Rebecca also seems like she would be willing to look into it again, just in case this mechanic ends up being too game-breaking. But what is important to note here is that whenever you get one decree, there is a cooldown on this ability before you can cast it again, and that cooldown gets longer and longer the more decrees you get, capping out at a maximum of 150 seconds till you can get the next decree. So all in all, if you want to have a lot of them, you better stay in the mission for long, but this is also what Koumei excels in. Specifically, endless type missions are going to get super chaotic if you stack a lot of these decrees over time. One more quick info here. In the unlikely case that whatever mission you get from the decree is not really manageable for you, you can hold the ability button to cancel the decree. However, also if you cancel it, you will have to wait for the cooldown until you can cast it again. Oh yeah, and if you cast Omikuji with a 666, then you will get the decree right away without having to do the task. Ability number 3 is Koumei's survival tool, and that would be Omamori. Omamori surrounds you with a certain number of charges, the number of charges being equal to the whole number of dice eyes that Koumei was rolling in this ability cast. And what these Omamori charges do is, whenever you take damage, there is a 50% chance that instead of taking away at your health or shields, this damage tick is actually going to heal you for the same amount of damage times a certain multiplier that scales with your ability strength. Now, it should be noted though that if you trigger one of these charges, aka if one of these charges triggers the heal, then there is a 3-second cooldown that you cannot influence at all before the next charge can trigger again. Or, in other words, every 3 seconds you have a 50% chance that if you take damage, you get a little bit of heal, and then you have to wait for another 3 seconds before that effect can protect you again. So while Omamori is certainly one puzzle piece in your whole survivability, it alone is by far not strong enough and not consistent enough to keep you alive on its own in higher level content. And just by the way, in case you roll it with a 666, then you will get fully invincible for the duration of your Omamori charms, but, and this is very important, Omamori is not recastable until you're down to 5 or less charges, then you can recast it again, but not sooner. So you can't just spam the button until you get the invincibility and then roll with that. That's unfortunately not possible. And finally, Koumei's ultimate ability, Bunraku. This is a very nice crowd control and status primer at the same time. What it does is it puts all the enemies that are currently in range and, very important, on screen. It doesn't go through walls, they have to be on screen. Those enemies will be put onto strings like little puppets, fully taking them out of the action and also inflicting random status effects onto them. The number of status effects that each enemy gets is equal to the number of eyes that Koumei rolled with her dice. Just one thing to note here, if you for example roll a 10 with this skill, it could be that the enemies get 10 random different status effects, but it could also be that they just get 10 of the same type, like 10 slashes or like 5 toxin and 5 electricity. That is completely random. And if you roll this with a 666, you get further status effects over time, and it also applies to enemies that are behind you. I personally really like this skill, and it's very strong to lock down enemies in a room from a certain side and also to use it as a status primer at the same time. And finally, one more quick note from my side. Koumei is a brand new Warframe, so at the point of making this video, there isn't a full wiki entry on all these abilities just yet. So if there happen to be like secret interactions between certain abilities or weapons with those skills, then this is not public information yet. Everything I just told you was purely from my own testing, and if in the future there happen to be new revelations, then I will also keep you updated in the pinned comment. So if you're watching this video in the far future, maybe you want to take a look at that first. Just like you might also want to take a look at the like button because it will help the channel big time with the YouTube algorithm. So cheers so much for your support, and now let's go on. Okay, so before we get into the mods themselves, I want to talk a bit about Koumei in general because unlike pretty much any other Warframe in the game, she is just super weird and kind of impossible to build because of all the RNG that she is based around. What I mean by that is, with your mods, you can hardly influence any of the things on her abilities. For example, her second skill with the decrees, nothing about these values here can be modified whatsoever. Similar with the Omamori, the only thing you can influence here is the heal multiplier, but the block chance, the recast count, the internal cooldown, and the number of charms, this is also either set in stone or based on RNG, and in addition to that, all your status effects from your first and your fourth skill are also randomized, so even on very high investment, your Koumei is not going to be all that different from a Koumei with very low investment. At the end of the day, it's mostly based on RNG, and that not only makes building her very different from building any other Warframe, but also the main power that she provides doesn't come from her ability damage or synergy or anything, but mainly from all the decrees that you can stack with your second skill. But what that also means is, playing Koumei is very simple. When you're in the mission, you cast your Omamori to get that little bit of protection that it provides. Then use your first and fourth ability to lock down the enemies and inflict status effects. And most importantly, try to stay in the mission as long as you can to stack as many decrees as possible with your second ability. But with all that being said, let's finally take a look at the builds themselves, and here I want to start out with a very budget beginner friendly approach because of the fact that Koumei is available so early on, and also because her randomness allows her to be very viable even on the lowest of investments. Let's take a look at it. This right here will be my super duper beginner build. Energy Siphon in the aura. In case you don't have that though, you can also use Dreamer's Bond, no problem. Flow for more maximum energy, Equilibrium for your energy regeneration, and then just some Vitality and Steel Fiber to get a bit tanky. That should already be more than enough as soon as you have a couple decrees, and in case you want to deal a bit of ability damage, you can throw in Intensify as well, but this one is already optional. I think most new players will already have these mods very early on, and with just this budget approach alone, you should already be strong enough to tackle the entire star chart with Koumei, given that of course you stack up your decrees and gain your power from that. But I know you're not here for the beginner builds, you want to know how to play her in Steel Path, so let's take a look at that too. In today's video, I have prepared two Steel Path builds for you. One is focusing on making her very tanky, so you can use her as a health tank, and the other one is focused on playing her into shield gating, that being the build to go for if you want to go to level cap and super ultra long endurance, where just tanking on health alone is not gonna cut it anymore. So let's take a look at it, starting with the Archon shards. And what we see here is pretty straightforward. We go for 2 blues to increase our maximum energy, therefore we don't have to use a flow mod and open up this mod slot. Next, 2 yellows for more casting speed, because especially her fourth ability has a pretty hefty casting animation, and this one speeds it up significantly. As for the last shard, this is, I would say, a flex slot. You could go for whatever you like. But let's now take a look at the mods, starting out again with the health tanking build. First, here I infused Mirage's Eclipse to get the 75% additional damage reduction. Infuse it over her 1, but if you prefer the 1 over the 4, you could also put it on her 4 instead. That is pretty much up to your personal preference. Then, in the aura, you're free to use whatever you like. I went for Corrosive Projection to reduce enemy armor and therefore deal a bit more damage myself, but you could go with anything here. Then we make sure to be very tanky with Umbral Vitality, Umbral Fiber, giving us nice health and armor, as well as Adaptation for an additional layer of damage reduction, Arcane Reaper for even more damage reduction through armor and health regeneration, as well as Arcane Blessing to increase our maximum health by up to 1200. With all of this combined, we have tons of armor, cap out at over 2000 health, have 3 layers of damage reduction, and our Omamori charges on top, so we are very survivable, and the rest of the build is just a healthy mix of range and duration, equilibrium for the energy supply, and I gotta say, it is actually a very basic build, most actually not really needed if you don't want to go for it, so there are many flexible mod slots here. Because of the fact that I already mentioned, most of her skills can't really be manipulated with mods anyway in the way that you might want them to. Also, here I left the Excellus slot open because I went for 2 Umbral mods and I didn't want to go for an Umbra Forma just for this showcase. So much for the health tanking build, very basic, but let me know your opinions on this in the comments down below and also maybe share what you're modding for. But now also let's take a quick look at the shield gating build. Here, things look a little bit different. Instead of Eclipse, I decided to infuse Condemn from Harrow, this being a very convenient to use skill, helping you to fill up your shields in an instant over and over again. For additional safety, I added Brief Respite on top of that so that we can refill our shields by casting abilities. Prime Sure-Footed, here very important because this build is meant to go up to level cap if you wanted to, so knockdowns are super deadly. Primed Redirection to have more maximum shields, therefore increasing the time that our shield gating gives us. Rolling Guard to negate status effects, also very important if you want to go level cap. And then the rest is again up to personal preference as much as you see fit. This right here is the full setup. I did go for Arcane Nullifier just to make sure that magnetic procs cannot kick me out of the game, and the second Arcane slot is again up to your personal preference. Maybe you want to buff a weapon, maybe you want to buff up the attack speed of your melee, maybe you want to double down with Arcane Energize, I don't know, go for whatever you like. As I said multiple times in this video already, your main strength comes from the decrees that you roll. Therefore, the main thing your build needs to do is keep you alive, and otherwise, you're free to go for whatever you see fit. One quick honorable mention here though, the helmet ability Sickening Pulse could also be very cool on her, because Sickening Pulse increases the stacks of status effects that are already on enemies, and given the fact that you deal so many of these status effects, yeah, I could see this being pretty darn cool, but I have yet to test it out myself though. With Koumei though, one thing that in my opinion is way more important than the mods in her build is actually which weapons you play her with, so let's talk about that for 1 second here too. First of all, we need to remember her passive. Every 60 seconds, one other weapon in your loadout will start dealing random status effects. This can be very darn strong, and you want to make sure to deal as many of these additional status effects as possible, so when selecting your loadout, I would try to make sure to go for something that has a high fire rate for the primary and secondary, as well as a high attack speed for your melee weapons, just so that you can really max out the amount of extra status effects that you're going to be dealing with the passive. Then, in addition, as we already figured out, the main source of Koumei's strength is going to come from the random decrees that you stack on top of each other. Therefore, we need to choose a loadout that works well with most of the Devira decrees out there, just so that whatever we get, we can get at least some use out of it. For example, what I mean here is, there are tons of decrees that are only available for melee weapons, as well as other decrees that only affect ranged weapons. In other words, if you play Koumei, then you better make sure to have a primary, secondary, and melee weapon all equipped at the same time. Also, while many decrees give you additional status chance or additional fixed status effects and crit damage over crit damage over crit damage, as far as I know, there is only one single decree in the entire game that actually increases your crit chance. Therefore, crit chance is something that you need to bring yourself. This one is probably not going to come from your decrees. I personally would recommend hybrid weapons, those that have decent crit as well as status characteristics at the same time, so that no matter if you get a status-based decree or a crit-based decree, you can get good use out of it anyway. So yeah, when you want to get the most out of Koumei, make sure that A, your weapons can attack really quickly, B, maybe even have a bit of an AoE so they can hit more enemies at the same time, and C, have hybrid characteristics of good crit and status at the same time, so that no matter what happens, no matter what the random number generator decides for you, you will always be able to benefit in some way or another from the decrees that you roll and from the random effects that you trigger. As for the companions, I actually don't want to talk all too much about it because at this point I haven't had the chance to have a thorough look at the companion rework, and also due to all the randomness, I would say just use whatever you feel comfortable with. But if something special for Koumei comes to mind as I work on my companion guide, I'm going to give you a companion update for Koumei in that one when it comes out. Koumei is not the only new thing in this update though. We also have reworks for Nova, Caliban, companions, and much more. I will make videos about all of that here in the upcoming days, so if you don't want to miss out on them day one, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. Another big shout out to Quest to Conquer Cancer. Donate for the good cause with the link in the description. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.